More than 3/4 of Nepalese women cannot read or write, but this does not deter advertisers from capturing the attention of young and old with an increasing intensity of display. In a new approach to studying visual literacy, UNICEF set out to discover how quickly non-literate villagers could improve their understanding of pictures. On each visit, the villagers were shown a set of illustrations and pictures to study, an exercise most were unused to. Villagers scored points on their ability to identify the objects, expressions and the deeds of characters in the illustrations. Back in rural areas, however, there are few, if any, manufactured visual images. Here, information is passed by word of mouth. Pictures and illustrations are rarely seen, and past research into visual literacy has shown that villagers in this environment have difficulty understanding pictures and visual aids.
Hello everyone, I'm hoping that you will be able to understand my Scottish accent, which has been tidied up over the last 36 years just so that I could be understood by the audiences. It's difficult to hear. I'm not sure about the volume. Is that better? I have to speak a little louder. There you are. I was worried about amplifying my chewing earlier on, so I put the microphone away, but now it's here. So thank you very much for the invitation to come here and talk. My name is George McBean. My wife told me to wear this sweater because of the killing, and she said I would be accepted in Denmark if I showed some Scottish knitwear. But there's two things I want to share with you today. The first thing is visual literacy, which actually segues quite nicely into Richard's last talk, which is what people understand from looking at pictures, from children to adults. It's a learning process that you go through on your mother's knee. If you're in the West, you sit on your mother's knee and you see the way Jack walks up the hill and you think that it's natural. But if you're a 30-year-old farmer in Nepal and you have never seen a picture before, then you have to go through that same process of learning as a child to understand what information is in a picture. So I want to show you two clips of film, the first being some research that was done for UNICEF in Nepal in the 1970s. I joined UNICEF in East Africa and as an artist, as an animator. But when you join the United Nations, no matter how flowering your opinion is about education or whatever, you get no money to do anything unless it's researched, unless you can show that it's not your personal opinion, that there's something valid in it and that it can work. You don't get any funding from any UN agencies. So the first part of the story I want to tell is about that early work using visuals in refugee camps and in nomadic groups of people in northern Kenya and in Nepal. And then the second part is about animation, the idea of there being a genre of animation for development that actually brought the industry together in terms of Hollywood got involved, and there were two summits, one in 1990 and one in 1994, which brought together the heads of major studios that were competitive to talk about this subject of animation for development and actually to contribute funds and training and ideas to UNICEF's initiative in New York. So I want to just start by showing this picture because it's about the earliest I can go with a visual, and try and explain just how, if you imagine this cave in Spain where there's a man, stick figure with a spear, throwing at a buffalo, and if you imagine the group of people, the tribe that walked into that cave shortly after this drawing was done. Because today we have an industry of interpretations of what this picture is about, why it was done. Was it done for the gods? Was it just an expression, the colours? There are many, many people written books about what goes in to this picture. But what I want to point out is the person who walked into the cave, who was from a tribe that was throwing stones at buffaloes, and looked at that and said, my God, he's using a stick. And we should try that because these stone axes are actually not very good. And so when they left the cave, they left with a piece of information that was taken from a visual on a wall, and that visual literacy skill is the narrow part of my talk. I'm going to keep returning to that people bring their own meaning to what they see, and that when a number of people look at a drawing, you will get a number of interpretations, but some people are very good at extracting information from that will be of value to them. And you have to know that if you are in the business of communication, because you must not assume that what you draw, what you present to people, is what they will understand what you are trying to say, unless you take into account visual literacy levels. So when you see today's teenagers flipping through a Vogue magazine, they are seeing what kitchens look like in America. They are seeing what fashion looks like in different parts of the world, and they are instantly learning information from a visual photograph that you don't have to have the ability to read to understand. Now, I just want to put in a couple of points here, that in the beginning was the book, and that according to Martin Ames, around the 11th century, there was a monk perhaps in Europe who died, being the last man who had read everything that was ever written in a book. So from the caveman drawings, you have a culture which wrote books in Latin, and by the 11th century, it was possible to have in one's lifetime the capacity to read everything. And since then, we've had, of course, numerous genres of books. There are many, many genres of books, from non-fiction to fiction, and they are listed there. But the interesting thing is that the first animation which came along in 1892, that it's our generation today who have the capacity to have watched every single animated feature film that was ever made. So we're at a time in history that we are just about to go beyond the capacity in our lifetime to view every single piece of animated feature film that was ever produced. So as producers of animation, you have to keep this in mind, that what you produce is competition with a lifetime of viewing that's already out there for people to view. So it becomes very important when you're designing your animation to make it something that will stand out from other stuff to be viewed. And that only happens really in the cities and the urban and environments where the mass media is prolific. So graphics have always helped. I put in this image because it's one of my favorites. This is a graphic that was used to show Napoleon's march into Russia. And if you see the thick line at the beginning, the grey line, that is the number of soldiers. 422,000 men leave Paris and they go to Moscow, and they come back and there's only 400 left. Sorry, 4,000 left. So this was a graphic that was done to show the loss of life in the Napoleonic War. And even amongst decision makers, these things can be influential. Politicians respond to graphics just as much as everyone else. So we're up to a bit closer to our time now, in the 1970s in East Africa, there were many visuals that were used in health education in Kenya when I joined UNICEF. Some of them were used in refugee camps for Somalis, showing black American mothers in a shower washing as a hygiene poster. Now, these posters were not working so well, but the assumption was because it was a black American mother, it would work in Africa because it's a refugee camp. So my first job with UNICEF was to go to these camps and to draw people doing the things that we wanted them to do to help them protect their children, hygiene messages, health messages. And the difference was that when you begin to draw people in these situations, there is of course an immediate interest in what you're drawing, because people can then relate to it. When you have groups of people surrounding you as an artist drawing them, they could tell how many children the mothers had by the number of bracelets on their arm. They could tell which tribe they were from the different markings on the skin. And we found that if you were to draw severed hands, they were not well accepted, because in Somalia, if you were a thief, you had your hands chopped off. So this immediately related to the culture of what are they showing hands that are severed in an illustration for. So we had to draw the complete act of washing the hands. So another one that was humorous was that, if I go down these, that people take more interest, it's a common thought, isn't it, that people take more interest in a drawing of themselves. Now, I've reconstructed this, but there was a poster from Scandinavia that was circulating from a drugs company in East Africa at the time, and it was a medicine for sickness, diarrhea, where sequencing, if you have vomiting and diarrhea, you take the tablet and you're a happy person at the end of it. And in this poster, of course, when it reached Somalia, everyone reads from left to right. So you have the happy person who takes the drug and starts to vomit. So the drug company learned very quickly that they had to know the culture. Now, when we started to do this and develop this idea, we were talking to local artists and helping to train them. So we asked them, who are you drawing for? Is it the international art specialists? Is it for artists' friends? Are you drawing for the boss or for the target audience? In those days, that was a popular phrase, target audience. Are you drawing for them to help them understand something visually that you want to present to them? Now, my speciality at the time was to draw things for non-literate mothers, because the illiteracy rates were so high at that time that we felt that we could reach mothers without them going through an educational process to learn to read and write. We could reach them immediately if we were able to teach and explain through drawings. And so this is the part where I show a film. So if you give me a moment, what I'm going to do is to show you a film from Nepal about the study in visual literacy. I should say that I was transferred after 7 years in East Africa. I went to Nepal, where the same problem existed. There was only 12% of women that could read and write. This, I hope, explains it better than I can, because I'm not a talker.
If a non-literate farmer has managed to live for 45 years without learning anything from a piece of paper, There is a degree of novelty in studying pictures. It is hardly surprising that he has some difficulty in identifying some of the items in the pictures. He may never, in fact, have seen some of the items before. Here, the strangeness of the question, "What do you see in these illustrations?" forces him to study the drawings carefully. Some respondents took long periods of time to carefully examine the flashcards before expressing their opinions. Here the researcher asked the farmer why he has sandwiched silver paper into his hat, as well as traditional dry leaves. The farmer replies that it helps him identify his hat and that it is good decoration. In UNICEF, Communications Officer George McBean explains the study.
What we discovered from past visual literacy testing research was that some of the drawings were so poorly drawn that it was even difficult for us to recognize some of the drawings that were being shown to rural villagers. So now we believe that testing visual literacy with bad drawings is like testing literacy with bad handwriting, and then blaming the villager for not being able to read the writing. So we used good artists such as Sharad to draw very clearly the illustrations that you see here. What we tried to discover was how rural villagers who are non-literate would respond to 6 visits of being shown different types of illustrations. So on visit 1, we have this line here, which covers household objects, objects in the environment, expressions on the face, smiles and tears, people working, people interacting, and then something that many of the past studies showed was movement, lines which are drawn on the page are the artist's impression of movement. And so we tried to find out whether people would understand these lines if they were shown regularly. We tried to show perspective. Non-literate villagers had difficulty often understanding perspective drawings. So in this study we asked the question with this set of illustrations. We asked the question, which villager is nearest to the woman? And those who saw two-dimensionally would say that this one is nearer because this distance is closer. And those who saw perspective, those who saw depth, would realize that this boy is further away in the distance. Then comic strips, the sequence of comic strips, unfamiliar objects, things that they perhaps had never seen before, and then color illustrations. There is an increasing capacity to be able to show color photographs because in most capital cities now this facility is available. We moved on to more sophisticated colored illustrations where the image is split into 2 halves. One girl, half of the girl is working in the village and the other is going to school. And the more complex, abstract illustrations of scenes that would be familiar but from an unusual angle.
The pace of life in rural areas is such that the daily chores are undertaken with seemingly little choice, determined more by the needs of survival. Although the whole family shares in the workload, major decisions about what should be done are almost entirely made by men. Learning takes place for everyone, not from books or pictures, but from experience and imitation. Here a fisherman is shown illustrations of food items. The researcher tries to discover if he will identify a line drawing of the fish he catches every day, and whether a mother can understand drawings which represent emotional moods, such as anger, fear, and sickness. Whether a non-literate would appreciate the sequence of illustrations in a comic strip and follow them in the correct order. The challenge of single-point perspective, where objects in the distance appear smaller. These were all questions asked by the study, and most importantly, would the villagers who were taught how to read pictures improve their visual literacy level any more than those who were simply exposed to the pictures over the 3-month period? The most significant result of the research was that everyone improved their visual literacy score, despite the fact that the illustrations became more sophisticated and difficult to interpret. The study measured change in response to a total of only 60 test cards. That improvement was recorded at all indicates the ease with which visual literacy can increase if given the opportunity to do so. The most dramatic improvement was recorded on the set of cards covering perspective, indicating that teaching greatly helps speed up recognition.
I'm going to cut that off there and just explain a little more that amongst the results of this, visual literacy, we were able to design a program that tried to reach Nepalese mothers over a 2-3 year period with this problem, because in Nepal in 1982, 40,000 children died every year with diarrhea-related illness. It was the single largest killer of children in Nepal. Only 600 doctors in the country. There were 400,000 faith healers. Now, the faith healers at that time were giving the wrong information. They were telling mothers that if their child had diarrhea, then don't put anything in, because nothing will come out. So as a result of that information, so many children were dying. My friends in UNICEF tell me today that they don't want to come to any of my talks unless I am critical, unless I put in something critical and not just sound as if I'm praising all the time. So I've learned to put in the critical part. The critical part of this story is that the fight to have UNICEF itself understand that we were not there just to train doctors and nurses, that we had to deal with the faith healers. And the fight against the Nepalese government, who said you are not getting permission to touch faith healers because they are dangerous quacks. When we put the communication argument to them that training doctors would take so long to reach anything that's influential, and the doctors themselves with 7 years training had queues outside their door of mothers with children with diarrhea. They hadn't even time to practice medicine. So when we said we were going to reach the faith healers, they said, well, you can try, but there's no pope of the faith healer. There's no one person you can go to and say, you must go and change habit. We had to think of a strategy to reach 400,000. And one of the ways we did it was we recruited retiring Gurkha soldiers. And we told them that when they went back to their village, they were to sit down with faith healers and show them how to mix oral rehydration, which is a handful of sugar, 3-finger pinch of salt, and 3 tea glasses of water. And with that solution, you could save a child's life. Only 12% of people in Nepal knew it at the time. We were trying to increase the awareness of that. Now, at the end of the day, out of all the media we used, and we used a lot of different media, the one thing that was the most successful thing, perhaps in my career, as a visual aid, was a memory card that we produced for the, I carry it around, for the faith healers. We produced 1 million of these and we gave them to every faith healer, which shows the visual diagram of how to mix oral rehydration solution. They were demonstrated and then given this. I know to this day 1 million of these were printed and none of them were ever destroyed. And the reason being is that we put the faith healers' God on the back of the card. So they kept the card in their hats and their bags. And I today can go back to Nepal and find faith healers still carrying this card with how to mix oral rehydration. Now, if I speed on, I want to say that 10 years after, the health statistics showed 52% reduction in infant mortality. I can't say why, can't take all the credit, of course, there's other things, cleaner water, but 96% of the population by the end of 3 years knew how to mix oral rehydration. And once I put this story in because I want to return to it when I get to the end here. I've shown changing visions. You see I've shown it out of sequence. And visual literacy research. But the next thing that I want to show is that we began to, because the talent was there in Nepal with local artists, we knew, as you all know, that if illustrations work, animation can work better because it has that ability to convey through movement, through, if you have this captive audience in the screen, sometimes we would project it in Nepal onto a bed sheet hanging from a tree where the woman would sit on one side and the men would sit on the other side and they would look at the reverse image, but it would be the same show. And these opportunities for animation began to open up because electricity was slowly creeping into certain villages and you could find community viewing halls in even the most remote parts of Nepal. So the next video is my sort of show and tell of people. This is this part of the talk that is the story of animation for development, because from sitting in refugee camps and working for 12 years when nobody at headquarters ever took an interest, to suddenly having the invitation to talk to people like Bill Hanna of Hanna-Barbera and heads of studios in a summit in Prague, basically changed my life in terms of the job that I was doing, the sort of opportunities that opened up after that. So this is a little bit of the history that I want to show you rather than talk about, of what happened after we did visual literacy research. The second part of that film actually shows 3 different television formats that we also researched. It was a soap opera, animation, and there was a documentary film format. And when we tested these 3 formats with this same, sorry, how do I get it on the screen? So, is it? Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Now let me just explain this little bit. 3 different television formats, all trying to get the same message of hygiene over in a village. Documentary, soap opera, and animation. What we found was that the most popular was soap opera, because when a villager was looking at the soap opera, the wife was looking and saying, I could say that to my husband. that's an interesting, you know, there was discussion about the soap opera in the local language. The thing that was the worst was the documentary with the voice of God over unrelated footage on the screen in a village. This went right over everyone's head. Very few people understood the documentary format, and became clear it's something that's useful, but for an educated audience who understand the whole concept of documentary filmmaking. Animation became tops in trying to deal with sensitive subjects, things that were covering hygiene-related diarrhea, AIDS, things that of a nature where live action couldn't really deal with the issue in quite the same way. You couldn't show real people from the villages doing this. And today, if you go onto YouTube and you type in cholera, you will see what I believe to be one of the best examples today of animation for development that was made for the cholera outbreak in West Africa last year. Today's technology has allowed animators to respond very quickly, to have something that's very clear, to be out in the villages showing people what they can do to prevent the spread of cholera in the languages that they're familiar with. So I don't have that to show you because I'm not online, but UNICEF is famous for fundraising and using animation for fundraising. So this is Faith Hubley.
I think most great filmmakers at one point see the cyclical connections in life. And if we don't do the best for our children, we're hurting ourselves. I mean, it's almost selfish. Children are our resources. If we don't pass down what we've learned, I don't see any point in life.
Faith Hubley is an Academy Award-winning animator. She and late husband John created the first animated film for UNICEF, Children of the Sun, in 1961.
In terms of animation, which I came to later, because I went the first 10 years in film where it was not action, it seemed to me that there was just no finer medium for expressing the interior or exterior lives of children, because it's a freer form. And the imaginations of children are just, I mean, we're born with everything and then we lose it gradually in our lifetime. So to capture that and to honor it and to appreciate it visually is something that animation is.
I'm putting this on pause because all the genres of animation, this stands out. Academy Award-winning animator who talks so clearly about the purpose, the use of animation, but in the end what you're seeing is not animation for development, but something that expresses ideas. So I'm not condemning these other ways at all. These all exist like genres of books. But what I'm trying to do is isolate for this audience here the difference between doing something which imparts a message that is deemed valuable or health. This is the short piece of animation that was done by Nepalese artists. Very crude, but the first animation ever shown on Nepalese television. 2 weeks after television was in the country, this was on the screen. See, they all have iPads in Nepal.
visual artists in Kathmandu in 1987. 2 artists from Prague's Kratky Film Studios helped train 12 Nepalese artists in the techniques of animation. This was UNICEF's first real effort at building local capacity in the medium of film animation. Just 2 years later, UNICEF undertook its first major...
In 1990, UNICEF members and animation industry producers and directors came together in Prague to discuss the possibility of using animation to inform and educate populations of developing nations. From that meeting, several ideas and plans of action were suggested. Representatives from Walt Disney Feature Animation, Max Howard and Leon Jewson, made contact with UNICEF representatives, most especially George McBean, Communication Officer for the Caribbean, and Fred Wilmot of the Jamaica Information Service. Using George's expertise from an animation workshop experiment he conducted in Nepal, a plan was developed for a workshop to take place in Jamaica in 1991. With the support of Fred Wilmot, a curriculum was developed, and 4 members of Walt Disney Animation Florida went to Kingston, Jamaica, for the purpose of training gifted individuals from the Caribbean and Africa in the basics of our craft.
Children remember all the most important things in their lives. Verbal abuse and beatings are memories that many children never escape. They are driven from a happy childhood into a world of fear and violence. So the next time you lay your hand on a child, make sure that it is the gentle hand of support and comfort. Spread some understanding and the child will never forget. Remember, the violence outside your window begins with how you treat a child at home.
My name is Bill Hanna. I've been kicking around in this cartoon business for a long time. I had written a letter to George. He had asked me would I say a word of encouragement to you. I'm going to read what I wrote in that letter. I say, please, all of you here attending this workshop, know and believe and have confidence in yourselves that you will be able to produce animated films as good as or better than anything you will see here at this workshop. Look at them, study them frame by frame, read about them in books. Remember that we all had to learn the same way that you will have to learn. You can do it. I know for sure you can, or you would not be here attending this workshop. Go for it, and good luck to every one of you.
And just because of nostalgia, Bill Hanna is no longer with us, but at that meeting in Prague, Bill Hanna committed to helping UNICEF. And the next phase of that help was to produce an animated cartoon for South Asia in which a small girl would be the featured main character called Mina, and she would deal with things like getting the same amount of food as her brother, things that were culturally not accepted at that time in South Asia. So we simplified the character to a point where Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, all related to this one character as their own. Countries that were at war with each other suddenly were looking at a television character that they could relate to and the issues that the girl was going through. So Bill Hanna's studios in Philippines helped UNICEF upgrade the quality of the animation for development work it was doing. The stuff that you saw earlier, very crude, but let me tell you, audiences were huge for that because it was the first things that were shown on television that were locally produced. So when you have that phenomenon of quality in a competitive world, you must remember there are parts of the world that it's the only thing that's available, and when you're looking at that, there's no competition. So it's very, very influential. And if you believe that this is a history lesson for these people in rural areas that have no electricity and cannot read and write. It's not a history lesson. This is from 1970s and 80s, but today there are more non-literate people in rural areas in numbers than there were when I started with UNICEF. So it's a geography lesson. I can take you there tomorrow and show you people that are still living in that situation. We tend to get caught up by the numbers of girls that are being educated. The number of girls in school is increased dramatically, but the numbers are still so big that it's worthwhile keeping attached to this methods, or these methods that we had in the old days of reaching non-literate. This is Mina.
It's very difficult to control her. Raju, your work isn't easy either. But I was so tired. You do have a lot of work, Mina. From now on, I'll always try to help you as much as I can. What a lovely brother. What a lovely brother. Let's share half and half. Let's share half and half.
Now, Orlando was the ultimate invitation to go to Disney World and have an animation summit for animation for development. And at that time, there were many people from all over the world. And I've edited the next segment I'm going to show you with a bias towards Denmark, because there were people from Denmark at the conference, and I put them on here so that some you may recognize. And this is the story of Orlando, very short.
In 1994, UNICEF hosted a follow-up conference to the one held in Prague 4 years earlier. The second Animation for Development Workshop and Summit was held at Walt Disney World, Florida, and brought over 200 industry leaders and development specialists together.
UNICEF's relationship with the animation industry is really taking on. We have studios and groups of animators in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe and North America working with us. Some studios are helping us develop storyboards and articulate characters. Others are developing internships where young animators from developing countries could come and spend 6 weeks, 8 weeks to learn new skills. CIFA, the International Animation Society, is opening up doors to animators all over the world. Even the School of Visual Arts in New York is offering UNICEF a scholarship, a 4-year scholarship for a young artist to learn the craft of animation.
I need to stop that there, because Jana, if you're here, can you please stand up? Jana, who is going to talk to you this afternoon, is a product of this very program that was sponsorship from UNICEF to come from Yugoslavia at a time when it was very, very difficult for training in New York. And I haven't seen her for 15 years until last night. So it's very nice to see Jana here. But we were able to bring artists from developing countries for training in Disney and Warner Brothers and several other places that were training local artists how to make their drawings walk and talk and then go back to their country.
Is discovering that as access to television rapidly increases in the developing world, animation has the power not just to entertain, but to pass on life-saving messages in a creative, clear, and fun way.
The fact that 90% of the deaths of children in developing countries are preventable. Therefore, it's a communications problem as much as it is a medical problem. And the animator's skill to simplify messages and to be able to explain things, especially to non-literate populations, is so important, and it's almost as if it's as important a skill as a doctor's skill.
To make me really face myself in a different way, I turn off the hard information. You know, we're talking about a virus here, a virus that you can't see. What about the idea of the virus becoming a character within your story? Now you have a hook, you have something that's unusual.
Gunnar Villa, head of animation at Denmark's National Film School, was part of a team designing a storyboard on conflict resolution.
So I suggested 2 characters, and very simple characters, a circle and a square with legs, and and eyes and things like that. So it will be easy to work with. Actually, it was about a character who gets so angry that he explodes and get into pieces, and when they put themselves together, they have bits of pieces from each other. I could feel this is a good story. I could start to make funny sounds, and it was quite funny because when we worked in the workshop, and I talked about this kind of sounds, there was a lady in the group who said, "No, we can't do that. I can't imagine sound like that." So I had to do it. I had to show what is it we're talking about, like this. And suddenly she realized, yes, of course we can do this. When you use live action, it's like suddenly it's a specific person, somebody from Africa or somebody from Denmark. But if you use animation and use a carrot or a ball or whatever, a bottle moving around, it's more universal.
Somewhere out there, deep in the deepest darkness of space, there's a square-shaped metal planet called Alfa Romeo.
Watch it! That was Paul's who taught you to swim! It's all so indoors.
I've told you before, Bite, there is no out there. This is our world.
You call this a life book?
Don't rush me.
Don't rush you? I've waited forever for this!
Bite.
What's that?
So what about download? That can be your name.
Well, it beats Squarehead. Then again, anything beats Squarehead.
Oh, let's not think. Let's explore!
You understand what has happened?
No, but I have a feeling you're gonna tell me.
No. These are human beings from all over the planet Earth.
If we've a whole planet to explore, the sooner we get started, the sooner we get started.
Now, I showed that because that's our biggest flop. This was UNICEF after the success of an animation summit in which the whole industry came together to help UNICEF do specific message-orientated animation. We tried to collaborate with one studio to do something that would be a commercial success, that would sponsor itself, and suddenly the studios went back to bristling with competition and the money was now raised to go beyond this pilot. This was created by A-Film on their good will to see if we could raise money for a series which dealt with children in a global setting. Very ambitious, really, but ahead of its time. We called it Digit and Download, which is, but you'll see already the television is out of date from a few years back. So after the failure of this, decided to return to the roots and do animation that was, again, very, very powerful for the task it was set to do. Now, 1 billion people in the South Asia and Africa every day get their water from a hand pump. And these pumps, after 2 or 3 years, they fail because the maintenance is not good. So how about doing a piece of animation to show how to maintain a hand pump? It's not a culturally sensitive thing, although it's in many different cultures. The pump is the same. It's produced by UNICEF. It goes out to all these countries. So showing even groups of women who can get together in the village how to maintain a pump was one of the plans. And UNICEF began to distribute this next piece with all its think you get the idea. If I go through this very quickly, it's the construction of a water pump and the maintenance. This is the last piece, which is for Africa, a character called Sarah, who is a teenage character. She's still in production. So, as a result, I'm going to just jump back to this. So basically, in the summary of this is that I wanted to show the intimacy of learning, that when you're in a group and you're surrounded by people and you're looking at something that's with them, of them, there is a different learning environment to watching something on a screen that's from another country, and it's entertainment and it's offering you all sorts of information as well, but it's just very different. And the world has changed in the sense that now we have personal handheld communication tools, and if they had been available today, can you imagine this coming up when a mother wanted to know how to mix oral rehydration coming up on her iPhone? There's just no reason why it should not be available. Not just this, but all sorts of other things that can be explained to people when they want to know it. When they have an interest in a subject and they want to learn something, animation can provide a very, very good way of imparting that information to them in their time directly to them. So there is an exciting period ahead in the sense of for communicators to use visuals, to use animation. It's not just for television where there's masses of competition, but in the field of apps. And this whole idea of Richard's, which is people bring their own meaning to what they see when they look at something for the first time. It's something not ever to forget if you're a producer. You have to remember that people bring their own meaning to what they see. And I remember, this is a photograph. So when you look at it, for a lot of people they will see somebody drowning, but for other people they will say it's laugh out loud. So when you see someone drowning, laugh out loud. This is the new jargon of the internet. So I want to finish there. I have left you with that link to YouTube, which I think is a good example today of development animation, but then open the floor now to any questions that you might have. Thanks for your attention so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, we are a little short of time, but we will do some Q&As. And we have this microphone, and is there any questions among the audience? Perhaps until then, you talked about the flop that you had with the cartoon that didn't hold. Is there some kind of, when you have been doing this for a number of years, do you have some do's and don'ts about animation towards this audience? Experience where you can see, hey, this, you ended up with this laughing out loud, so yes. People interpret their own thing. But what works and what definitely doesn't work when you do animation towards this audience? Yeah, I think that's a question you have to give yourself every time. You have to ask what works and doesn't work. If people knew in advance, a lot of the time they would not make flops. But I think that basically the idea is that
within all the genres of animation, there is an industry behind it producing that type of animation, and there is competition within that industry for who does it best. And depending on what type of animator you are, you will not make a living doing animation for development. But what I would like you to leave here with, if you're an animator, is that when you spend 2 weeks drawing something that you know is going to entertain somebody, or do a segment which is going to sell a product on the marketplace, know also that if you got the right message, you could draw something that could save a life or help somebody. There is no shortage of these types of messages that need to be illustrated better. You know, this idea, last week people were telling me a story of India, that in one village there's women that go and collect water from the river, and they wrap their sari around the top of the mouth of the jug, and they take it back. And then down the river, the women just go in, their habit is to just fill the water jug. Now, up the river, where they put the cloth on the top, 20% less cholera every year. Now, this is not ideal. The ideal is to give them clean water, but that's a piece of information that you would think would be valuable to the people down the river. And this is what it's like all over the world. There's no need to export these ideas, that within a community there are farmers doing it right next door to farmers who are not quite getting it. People that are doing health, bringing up their children correctly, and it's just a case of sharing or facilitating that sharing of information that makes the percentage go up. Sorry, that's...
You said that there was, at the beginning of your speech, there was enough animation for more than a lifetime.
Yes.
So the fight for attention was increased, was being increased. Is it, in your opinion, more difficult today to get the attention, for instance, in Nepal or India, than it was 20 years ago? Because you know, are they in this information age as we are?
Yes, they are. The problem before was isolation from information. The problem today is to know what is the right information. It's over-stimulated environments where young people don't know, can't decide what amongst everything that they see has a value. And so the challenge is to see through all that. And instinctively, children have a self-corrective capacity. I like to think that society has a self-corrective capacity, and that we're in the process of that all the time. And the doom mongers are certainly out there talking about the environment and things, but I'm hoping that with communication that this self-corrective quality of man can kick in. And especially when we talk all the time about the world, we tend to be talking, especially in Europe, about America, and you know, the rest of the world is where the world's nursery is at this moment. This is where the populations are increasing. So it's the young people in countries like you saw there that will have the balancing point depending on how they're brought up. We can debate forever about fine-tuning our education systems here, but no one's going to be really sort of, you know, we have an aging population. We have a population that's balanced. So if you want to influence a new generation, the nursery's out there.
That's right. George, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.